One of the major problems New York City faces is the lack of affordable housing.
That's right, and there's multiple factors really that have led to the current housing crisis. Let's talk about them. Rising interest rates have people holding on to homes. That means reduced housing stock for sale and higher prices.
Yeah, and if people can't buy homes, of course, they have to rent, which drives up rental prices. And inflation is pushing up costs as well. And that's why the Rent Guidelines Board proposed an increase of almost 16% for 2-year leases on rent-stabilized apartments.
So to take a closer look at the housing crisis, we're joined by Leah Goodrich. She's on the city's planning commission and managing attorney for housing policy and mobilization for justice. So Leah, good to have you here. Thanks for being here.
Thank you so much for having me.
So this is an important topic, right? Because every kind of week we're doing a new story about which borough is paying the most to live. When you look at it in a totality, which part of the population would you say is being impacted the most here?
Well, definitely renters. And in terms of boroughs, Manhattan has consistently had the highest rent. Back in January, it actually surpassed an all-time $5,000 for the median rent, right? And so it's just terrible.
I know this could be a very broad question, but really, what could be done to help with this crisis?
Yeah, you know, New York is fortunate in the context that we have a lot of tenant protection. So as you mentioned, I'm a tenants' rights attorney. We have rent stabilization. And so one of the main things that can be done is for the Rent Guidelines Board to have, issue a vote with low rent.
Yeah.
So, when I was on it, we had a rent freeze, and that was very helpful to New Yorkers.
Well, look at what just happened now. I mean, they're preliminarily already raising rents once again, so it kind of puts you in the same dilemma of rents going up, right? So, and New Yorkers are savvy because there's always someone that's going to pay that $5,000, right? And so, how do you kind of balance it all out to bring costs down?
Yeah, that's the problem. There's always someone that's going to pay the $5,000, so then New Yorkers end up leaving.
Right.
They end up moving down south in other places that are more affordable, and then those places will face what New Yorkers are facing. So that's part of it. The way to balance it out is to have regulations, is to have lower rent, and is to talk about it, to amplify the problem so that city officials, including myself, including the mayor, including city council members, are aware of it.
Let's talk about the housing shortage. Which area would you say has the biggest issue with housing right now?
In terms of the boroughs, I think each borough has particular neighborhoods that are facing housing shortages. And as a city planning commissioner, part of the what I do, I'm one of 13, is we vote on approving housing proposals. So we get a lot of them, for example, in the Bronx. So the Bronx is definitely one of the boroughs that are being developed. But, then there are other questions about whether my questions that I raise are whether, some of the affordable apartments are actually affordable.
Well, that's a big topic of conversation,
yeah.
right? and then when you look at everything, you're very into the whole community of where people go, right? The folks who live in Manhattan, they get priced out, they go to the outer boroughs. So now you have areas of Brooklyn and Queens that used to be affordable, that are no longer affordable to live, and then people move out.
Right,
So,
I'm from Brownsville. I grew up in Brownsville, Brooklyn, and I just took a look at Street Easy, and it's $500,000 for homes there now.
Yeah.
So it's a lot. I can't afford it.
So here's my question, right? Because you have a unique perspective being on the Rent Guidelines Board. I'm just going to zero in on that component for a second. How do you stop them from raising rents, right? Because it's a mayor-approved board, and so if you've had the conversations about rents being too high, why are they going ahead with an increase? Yeah,
so I was on the Rent Guidelines Board and then left to join the commission, but can certainly speak to what's going on. It was interesting. I was one of the few, I think I was the only tenant while I was on the Rent Guidelines Board, so I think that shapes a lot of the perspectives. And you mentioned that it is a mayor-appointed board. I had been appointed by de Blasio, and many of the appointees now are under the Adams administration. There are hearings that happen, but I think there is often a there's a sort of perception that New York City is this tenant-controlled city, which we do have 70% of renters, but that tenants control everything, and so there needs to be this sort of balance. And what ends up happening is there is a conversation about how do we protect small landlords, when in fact small landlords do not represent the majority of landlords in New York City.
Well, you have an event planned for tomorrow.
Yes.
correct? Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Sure. I organized an event, and it is at New York Law School, and it is called Racialized Displacement, a conversation about the New York City housing crisis. And I wanted to talk as a city planning commissioner and as a tenants' rights attorney about the fact that people of color are disproportionately pushed out of New York City.
Yeah.
I mean, even there was a Street Easy report that said that Black and Hispanic New Yorkers who are making median household incomes can afford less than 15% of rentals.
Wow.
I know.
That's eye-opening.
It's something to talk about,
It
so that's
really
what we're going
is.
to do tomorrow
Good.
at 6 p.m. at New York Law School.
Important conversation. Important
Thank you.
conversation. Good to have you here, Leah.